Welcome everyone to a conversation with Caroline Bliss Larson and Dr. Ron Melmed. My name is China Reavers and I'm here on behalf of the Montana Book Festival. We're really excited to have you both here for this year's virtual festival. And with that, I'd like to introduce you to our authors. Caroline Bliss Larson is a children's author, full-time editor of online courses, and a freelance book editor. To clear her head of words from time to time, she likes to Irish dance, play games, and snuggle her nieces, nephew, husband, and delightfully clingy cat. Ron D. Melmed, MD, developmental and behavioral pediatrician, is director of the Melmed Center in Scottsdale, Arizona, and co-founder and medical director of Southwest Autism Research and Resource Center in Phoenix. And with that, I'll let you take it away.
Thank you, China. We're very excited to be here. So thank you so much for having us again. So she introduced us a little bit. So I'll just tell you a little bit about our book series that we want to talk about today. It's called the ST4 Mindfulness Books for Kids. And they are all Monster Diary books. So Marvin's Monster Diary 3, Trouble with Friends, is our latest. And all of these books focus on ADHD and related topics. So our latest book is about making friends, and we also have books on anxiety, ADHD, screen time, too much screen time, and about anger. So you can see some of the titles on the shelf behind me. So yeah, they're just these fun illustrated chapter books about Marvin and his friends. So yeah, but we wanted to talk today a bit about the series and about ADHD and mindfulness and how we have written that into our books. So yeah, so China gave us a great introduction. And so Ron and I have been working together on this series for a couple years now. He wrote a few books before I joined him. But Ron, do you want to share anything else about yourself before we jump into our discussion?
Sure. So I'm a developmental pediatrician. I'm involved in half-time in research and half-time in practice. So I'm very much in the trenches. And the trenches are meaning I see parents who have children who are challenging, but often children who are pretty typical. And this series is for basically all children, because what I've found over the years that by including children into their own treatment, by making children mindful and aware of their own problems, and really making them the center of the therapeutic team, you are so far ahead, you're streets ahead in terms of being able to address almost any specific problem that might arise. Now, my focus in practice, especially in research, is on ADHD and autism. So although we do focus on those aspects and the associated problems that children with ADHD have, for example, the socialization deficits, this series is really focused on the typical problems of typical kids who every single day, especially now at the time of COVID, have issues related to anxiety, issues related to anger. Parents are concerned about how well they're socializing. They're spending way too much time in front of their screens. Parents don't quite know how to handle that. Parents themselves are at each other's throats. That doesn't help. So we use the concept of bibliotherapy, that by reading appropriate books which develop insights and provide tools, it's actually therapeutic. And it is bibliotherapeutic. It's the use of books. And both Caroline and I are book lovers, and hence the series. So that's just a little bit about me. My accent is a little strange, I know, but anyway, it's South African. I'm from Cape Town, South Africa, the most beautiful city in the world. I'm a touch biased, but that's what I believe. And now based in Phoenix, Arizona, where I've been for the last 40 years. Starting off, by the way, working on the Native American reservations, which made me fall in love with the Southwest. And of all the places in the United States that I thought I would end up, it was going to be the Southwest in magnificent, the great state of Arizona.
Oh, that's great. How nice. I didn't know that you'd worked with Native American Native American reservations. That's so.
Right. Navajo.
Oh, okay. That
Yes.
makes sense with in Arizona. I know there's a large reservation there.
Yeah, well, Navajo is the largest tribe in the United States, and this was Kayenta, which is a very small town right near Four Corners. So pretty close to Utah. In fact, Kitty
Yeah,
Corner.
indeed. So I'm in Utah, so we're state neighbors.
There you go.
Awesome. So uh, you gave us a great intro on why, because I wanted to ask you, why write this series, but I think you kind of answered it already. But why monsters? Like how did you originally come up with this idea of
Well,
particular concept?
when I see children in practice as a developmental pediatrician, my orientation is always to focus completely, almost exclusively on the child. So I don't speak to the parents and ask them what the problem is. I always try to elicit what's going on with the child. And in similar, once from the child's words and using the child's own ideas and insights as to what's going on. And similar, as I alluded to, in the therapeutic process, trying to get them involved in their own care. And first of all, by just placing them front and center and saying they are in charge of their own bodies. They need to have the tools. They need to be the captain of their teams, because eventually and essentially, of course, they are the boss of their bodies. So how we were going to do that, how I did that in practice, I continued to do that, is to develop a series of tools which I felt would be helpful for these children to have. Now we have to have something which kind of grabs them. And the tools that we have are very much kind of superpower, superhero kind of tools. Now the primary tool is and the name of the series is ST4. ST4, it's called the ST4 series. There is one S um, and there are four T's. So that's like a formula, like H2O. We have ST4. And what is ST4? What are the T's and what is the S? The S is stop. And the four T's are take time to think. Four T's. So think of the little STP motor oil logo. We don't say STP. We don't promise that in the parents' cars will get more gas from the car, but they'll certainly go a long way in getting more awareness when children can. There you go. Thanks, Caroline. Stop and take time to think.
In the back of our book.
So when utilizing that and many other tools in each of the books specifically related to the topic at hand, we can provide them the tool. But at the same time, it was important to give them something to relate to. Sometimes when parents talk to children, all the children hear is blah, 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 blah. It's so much easier if the child actually reads it for themselves, or if a peer would tell them, hey, you know what? I've been doing this thing and I've found it been very helpful. You should try it. Or if they read in the book about some super special person doing that same thing. So we thought monsters were going to be very appealing. We considered other animals, and possibly in the future we might move slightly away from monsters as we're reaching older and older children. But for our demographic, for our age group, the monsters have worked out absolutely perfectly well. They're delightfully illustrated by a fabulous illustrator.
So
And
cute.
oh, there you go. And so we've clothed the bones and the tools in the story form, and especially using the illustration. And the story form, of course, is, Karen, where you come in, creating the story to make the tools and come alive. You want to go from there and tell us how you jump off with the story development?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So I thought that was something that always really impressed me with this series. How I got involved was I was doing some freelance editing for our publisher, Familius. And they asked me to edit Harriet's Monster Diary, which we have right here, the green one. Can't see it super well, but and I just thought it was such a cute book. I read the previous two books just to get a feel for the series. And something that really impressed me was what you talked about, Ron, how very engaged the kids, or the monster kids in the story, are in their own growth and their own development. Marvin is our main character, and he's the one who came up with ST4. He had mentors that kind of gave him a little bit of nudge. He had parents, and in the first book, he meets his rock star idol, and his idol tells him about how he used to want to be a
drummer.
Yeah, how he used to want to be like a cameraman, and so this rock star idol like also kind of dealt with ADHD, and something that he taught himself was the monster cam, which is doing this and focusing on what you need to focus on, whether it's the teacher or the chalkboard or what your parents are saying, on their face, so you can pay attention to what they're saying. So Marvin kind of took that, ran with it, came up with ST4. And then as we progress in the series, Marvin or whatever friend is, kind of the secondary character, come up with these tools. And I've just always thought that was really cool. There's a feelings thermometer in Harriet's book, and that comes back a lot. And it comes in our second book there, the red one, the Marvin's Monster Diary 2 with Lissa. And so something that I have to think about a lot when I'm writing is, how do I make these books instructive without being kind of preachy? Because no one, especially kids, you don't want to listen to your parents all the time, and you don't want to read a book that sounds like your parents talking to you. Say, you should do this, you should do that. Why can't you do this better? Blah, blah, blah. So, and I think Ron kind of touched on that a little bit too. So some things that I have to think about as I'm writing is how to not come off as preachy. And I think that the kids are coming up with it is kind of the main approach I take, that I think is probably most important to that. But it's also really important to me that the characters feel really realistic, which is funny to say about monsters, because they're all kind of nondescript, fuzzy, multiple-eyed monsters with tentacles and all that. But their personalities are kind of human. They have hopes and dreams and desires, and they have flaws just like humans do. And so they very much feel like human characters. And, I think about this from book to book, because by the end of one book, ideally Marvin or whoever has learned something, and, trying to take that, whatever mindfulness technique, and apply it to their life and help their friend with it too. But then we come back in the next book, and, it's a process. Just because they learned ST4 in the last book doesn't mean that they're going to always do ST4 perfectly in every book. And so I think that's an important part of making them feel kind of human too, is that there's that kind of try-fail process as they're learning. And, they're still working on mastering it, and they share these tools with their friends. And sometimes they can say, hey, Marvin, you need to chill out a little bit, just ST4, think about your feelings thermometer, or whatever tool it is. Mm-hmm. So yeah, those are kind of some things I think about as I'm writing. Yeah.
Well, when you are writing, and we go through different stages and phases, and sometimes we bang out chapters in over a weekend, and the book's over a month, and sometimes it takes a lot longer to actually get things off the ground. What's your secret sauce for overcoming writer's block when you think, oh, I just don't know, I'm just so in the weeds over here, I just don't know how to figure it out? So what's the source you draw upon to move ahead?
That's a really great and relevant question right now, because as Ron hinted at, currently I'm in the phase of where the book is taking several months, when in the past some of our books have only taken a month or two to write, so because they're not very long, right? So we can hammer them out. But I've definitely been having some writer's block on our current book that we're working on, which is about bullying. And a lot of that, I think, is just because bullying is just such a wide concept, and there's so many things we could talk about with it, so many directions to run down. I want to write all these different subplots and for each character, but you know, we're trying to fit this into 100, maybe 120 pages with illustrations. And so we don't have a lot of words to work with there. But on top of that, you know, COVID-19 is stressful, political situation in our country is stressful and kind of takes up my mind a lot of the time. And so I've definitely been dealing with some writer's block this summer. But so the words are not always flowing, I will say. But I find that when I'm sitting down to write, or I need to write, I need to sit down and write. I like to take walks just around the neighborhood, not put in any music or audiobook or anything, just kind of let my mind wander. And a lot of the times I don't end up thinking about Marvin stuff. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. But it just helps to get out, get a change of scenery, especially during this kind of socially isolated time. Get some fresh air and vitamin D. Marvin does that in one of our books, actually, to kind of help him come up with ideas for a science fair project. And I wrote that in there because I'm like, that's really what I have to do when I'm coming up with ideas. And I found that for this series, it's been helpful to get my mind back on the right track. You know, if it's been a week or so since I've written and have been thinking about other stuff, if I read back through what I wrote or I read one of the previous books, that really helps me get into the voice of the story, because it's a very unique kind of silly, punny, kind of fast-paced story that I'm not as used to writing. I'm used to writing kind of longer, more wandering kind of stories. But yeah, I have to limit distractions and things too. Sorry, what'd you say, Ron?
Yeah, well, I was thinking that, you know, my role, you know, is to try and keep the therapeutic direction front and center, to try and make sure we have a framework that of evidence-based interventions that actually make sense and are recognized as being helpful for these children. So they're kind of partially cognitive behavioral therapeutic situations. And in this case, for example, the bullying, my job was, when we're thinking about a new concept, was to try and extract from the literature and my own experience and what I do day to day, with some kind of framework about how do we really understand what are people supposed to be doing about bullying. What is the perpetrator? What are the perpetrator's henchmen doing while the perpetrator is actually doing the bullying, verbal or physical? And then what are the bystanders thinking about? And then what does the hero think about, who's trying to do a stop to it but just can't pull it out of himself to get the bravery and the gumption and the moxie to stand up and fight for what's right? And they might just wander away. And then, of course, there is possibly a hero who says, this has got to stop. And of course, it can go to the parents and it can go to the teachers and da-da-da-da. But when kids work these things out, most of the time, they're doing it by themselves on the playground. So in that respect, when we come across a situation where we saying, okay, we're not moving as fast as we can, we try and go back to basics and try and understand the evidence-based principles that we're trying to work across to impart to the children, and use that as some kind of hooks to hang the situation on. So we're not pulling the stuff out of the air. What do you do about bullying? I spend a lot of time doing reading and in the literature, and often too much time trying to figure out, well, what really makes sense, what can really be done about it. Fascinating stuff. I mean, there are amazing organizations in all of these areas on bullying, national bullying situations, etc. But so that would be the situation. So I sometimes have trouble in formulating it and getting it together, and Caroline will challenge me and say, you know, that kind of doesn't make sense, but how would it be if we did it this way and that way? And then I would do the same with her about figuring out, okay, you know, what kind of context can we really put in it? Is it a context of a game within the book, the game of bullying, like the Game of Thrones or something like that? Or is it the concept of just the hero and using mythological kind of allegories to try and put together around it? And then, you know, slowly but surely the book gets done. And we are going on to book number 6 in the series. So whatever we're doing, it's working.
Yeah, it is. And that's been a really great part about working with you, is that you kind of keep me grounded. I tend to just start to think about the story threads, and sometimes I'm not the subject matter expert. I'm not the expert on these therapeutic tools. So it's helpful to have Ron not only give me the tools like, hey, these are the tools I think we should put in the book, but also say, Caroline, this is a cool story, but we need to focus more on the on the therapeutic aspect. I'm like, oh, you're right. Okay, let me rework things a little bit to make sure it fits well in the story and flows. So that's very true.
Let me, one of the original series or the original book in the series focused definitively on ADHD. Mm-hmm. And I've been involved with ADHD for too many years to admit to. But I was one of the very early adopters in the 80s and even the late 70s in trying to understand what this was. And the beauty of it, the whole beauty of ADHD for me was not so much that there was a label, but and the same is true, by the way, for autism. But ADHD gave us a lens through which we could look at children. And instead of using pejorative terms like lazy or crazy or dumb or stupid, we could look through this lens and try and understand individual differences. And instead of denigrating people for their differences, celebrating the children for their differences. I was particularly sensitized to that coming from South Africa, where differences were used to separate and denigrate. So my whole orientation initially was to try and understand what's going on under the hood. What is different about kids with ADHD? Yes, we can see they sometimes are hyperactive and cause trouble in the classroom by throwing spitballs. Yes, they're inattentive and don't complete their work and therefore do poorly at school. Yes, they're often kicked off the sports field because they get impulsive and they get angry too quickly. But what else is happening? Those are all clearly happening. But what's going on with their social interaction and their friends? And what's going on with their any worries about being different? And more, what's going on with their self-esteem? How do they feel about themselves? Do they consider themselves to be just losers and incompetent, and everybody hates me and no one understands me and you're so mean to me and I hate it? We have not focused, not in the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, the DSM book of diagnoses, we have not focused on that aspect. And so much of what we're trying to do is focus on the self-esteem, how to get kids to feel good about themselves so that they can take charge. And when they see heroes with similar difficulties having these kind of same problems as they do, that makes it so much easier. That's a shared kind of burden. That's why kids with ADHD are often amazed to hear that the teachers or famous people in history, President Kennedy or whoever else, had ADHD symptomatology as well, not too different from their own. So the self-esteem aspect is absolutely key. And eventually in parenting, and our publication company is major mission is to enhance parenting and thus thereby improve families. But that whole and I couldn't be more on board for that kind of situation, because what do we want from our children? We want them to feel good about themselves. We want them to feel they can go out there and nothing is going to stand in their way. And regardless of their individual differences, they will still be accepted and celebrated, but most important, self-accepting. So that theme runs through all of the books. ADHD, yes, but the celebration of individual differences is a whole nother 40,000 view mission of what it is that we're actually trying to do. So that's why I don't particularly enjoy the label or insist upon its use. and it's misused and it's abused, and there's a lot of things we can go back and forth regarding that. But important is that when a child is, and it's similarly when a child is angry. If you get a child who's angry, like Lissa, we have Lissa the monster. She's angry. We call that book Lissa the monster because I'm not sure if you know in the audience, but Lissa is the goddess of wrath. In mythology, and that's why the word Lissa, where the name of Lissa was chosen for her.
I didn't know that, actually. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's not Alyssa, which is without wrath, but it's Lissa. I'm sure there are many Lissas out there who would take umbrage about what I'm saying, and they're probably very calm and relaxed people. But when I think of anger, it's a similar kind of situation, and this is brought out in the book. Yes, you see an angry child, but that's like the tip of the iceberg. What's going on for the other 8/9? An angry person usually reflects what? Number one, anxiety. I'm stressed. I don't know what to do. So I'll hit and shout and scream. What else could it reflect? Troubles at home, definitely. Abusive situations, definitely. What else could it affect? Poor self-esteem. I'm dummy. I'm doing such a terrible job in my classroom. There's a whole range of different concerns which we have. And as parents, often we have been too quick to jump onto anger and saying, this is just an anger person. He's trying to get at me, my child, and I'm going to, by hook or by crook, I'm just going to knock this out of him. Instead of stop, ST4, take time to think, dear parent, just like we're asking your child to do, what's going on beneath the surface. So even though the topic of the book might be anxiety, or might be anger, or might be ADHD, we're trying to go a lot deeper than that.
Yeah, definitely. And so I'm wondering how you've seen these techniques work in the children that you meet with in your practice, and in especially those who have read the books, and also the parents, like how it's helped them too.
I should send you this, Caroline, because just this last week, a child sent me a picture of themselves. They made themselves an ST4 t-shirt. And it's just a regular t-shirt with a big S and a big T, big 4, and printed. And he had made that, and he's selling it to his friends or something like that.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, because we encourage children to make the ST4 logos, cut them out, put them on stickers, put them one on a mirror, put one on their trapper folder for school, put one on their school desk, maybe even put one around the breakfast table where a lot of attentional challenges are often seen. Definitely the dinner table happens there as well. So that they prompted to look at that, wait a second, ST4. So that, we encourage to take it to the schools even, and tell the teachers, teacher, parent could say, or maybe the child could say themselves if they were big enough and strong enough to say that. But when Johnny sees ST4, he knows how to stop and take time to think. So if you would use in the classroom a secret signal, that when you saw Johnny being disruptive in the classroom and you went up to him with 4 fingers on your cheek and went like this, and give him a smile without letting anyone else in the class know about the secret signal, the secret signal will alert Johnny to say, use your ST4. And Johnny will give a wink back to the teacher and say, I've got this. Thank you. Now, just imagine the difference as opposed to, Johnny, did you take your pill today? Get up, get out. Kicked out the classroom, go and speak to the principal, note to your parent, bad, 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 bad boy. When that is, that's the kind of stuff makes my heart absolutely sing. And when I hear those kind of stories from teachers and from the kids themselves telling me that they've used it. Now, it's not every kid who's going to want to use it. And some children might be shy or might be embarrassed. But this is our attempt to try and do that. And we're trying to make it as user-friendly as possible and make the stories not preachy, and in no way pejorative, for the kids to understand it's okay. You just have to understand yourself. You have to examine your own mind. A mind unexamined is a mind not worth living, and all that kind of good stuff. And this is just what we want our children to be aware of. And there's a section at the back of each of the books, a pretty intensive section for parents, for them to understand. Okay, yeah, we know these tools would be good for your kids, but you've got to participate in the most appropriate way as well. Parents want to do the best job. They want to feel competent. And when they feel incompetent about being able to make things work well for their children, they themselves get depressed. And guess what happens in the iceberg for many parents when you get depressed and you feel incompetent? Anger, shouting and screaming and yelling at your kids. I've told you 20 times, can't you listen? What's wrong with you? You're driving me insane. And it can escalate way further from that. So parents have to distinctly be on board. So certainly the book is directed 90%, but the back of the book very much is involving, okay, parents, this is what you can be doing. You can learn, and we use the term authoritative parents. You don't want to be a laissez-faire parent where anything goes, all woo-woo California styles that you are. Oh, I shouldn't have said that. But we don't want you to be woo-woo, and you don't want to be an authoritarian parent either, laying down the rules. This is the way you have to use your screen, and this is the way, this is the time you have to do this, and this is what you have to do that. And if not, you're in for the high jump, young man. Not authoritarian, not laissez-faire, but authoritative parents, parents who have tools at their own disposal, which they can use. And a lot of the tools for the problems that we're seeing today, no parents were taught that. So we need to teach parents as well explicitly what it is that they can do. That's the parent section, an important part of each of the books.
Absolutely. And I think that's a big benefit of these books is that, even though we have, they're kind of loosely about ADHD, they're for parents also, they're for teachers, they're for kids who maybe don't have a clinical diagnosis of ADHD or anxiety, but their feelings and experiences that, all kids go through, that I think they can apply in some way or another. And I find myself, I'm not even a parent, I'm not a teacher, I'm just a writer, but I find myself using ST4, since I've been working on this, especially, if I'm going to a speaking thing, well, not lately, going on Zoom, I guess, to a speaking event, and I'm feeling jittery. I'm like, okay, why am I feeling jittery? Stop, take time to think. Okay, I'm feeling nervous because I feel like I might sound stupid, but that doesn't make sense because I prepared for this, so, and it's okay if it's not perfect. It'll be fine. So I find myself using ST4 a lot.
Well, that's cognitive behavioral therapy in action.
Yes.
So that definitely works. So we've written a lot of books, it's wonderful working with someone who's not only an author in her own right, but also an editor. So it really it makes the process so much more easy and so much more smooth. So if any
I'm glad.
writers to be are interested, take a course in editing. But in terms of all those books and the characters, and especially our latest book, Trouble with Friends, does have you got a favorite? Have you got any favorite character that you think about in any of the books, or Trouble with Friends?
Yeah.
Or?
It's a tough choice because I love so many of them. I am particularly drawn to Harriet, especially in her book, but she's in lots of the books because she's just very tenderhearted, and I can relate to the kind of anxious, jittery kind of feelings that she feels sometimes. But she's very kind and a good friend. But I also love that in Marvin too. He's a little bit more kind of energetic and maybe a little bit more out there, and a lot more outgoing than Harriet, but he's a good friend. And I love that about our latest book. So here's Marvin, by the way. He's the little one in the middle, and Timmy and Joey. So Joey's new to this book. And he's kind of an obnoxious lake monster. And so I had a lot of fun writing him. He was really funny, but also at the same time recognizing I totally knew kids like that and in school, and they always got on my nerves. And so I kind of related to some of the kids at camp that were just could not deal with Joey. But here's Marvin, and he's like, I think this kid's really funny. Like, why don't you guys want to be friends with him? And he's just always about giving people chances and being a good friend. So I don't know. Those I would probably say Marvin and Harriet kind of for those reasons, but also Joey's very funny. So
You know, the thing I like best, I must tell you, and I'll take partial credit for this one,
yes.
about Trouble with Friends, is the subtitle. It's, you know, it's Marvin's Monster Diary, and then it says Trouble with Friends. And then after that it says, but I get by with, but I get by. And of course, that's an allusion to the Beatles song, I Get By with a Little Help from My Friends.
And Joey does.
So that gives away my my genre of interest in music.
Yep. Oh, this is so great. So what, do you have a favorite character or a favorite part?
You know, I've always liked Stevie Strummer. Stevie Strummer is the rock idol in the very first book who teaches Marvin. He's an adult who's enormously successful rock star, Marvin's idol. And Marvin is so amazed that Stevie Strummer is actually going to come and see one of their tryouts for the band. And then Stevie Strummer like gets off his pedestal and comes down to earth and sees Marvin like all miserable in the corner and goes over as an adult could and just sits by him and saying, hey, what's up, buddy? You know, what's going on? And then, you know, tells him his own story, plus gives him tools that he can use. And so Stevie Strummer is a real adult hero. I'm big into myth and Joseph Campbell these days. I don't know, I've been listening and reading a lot about mythology, but there are a lot of different heroes. I think we all recognize that Marvin is the hero through the book. You know, despite all his quirkiness, you know, he's just an amazing kid. He's compassionate, he's helpful, he's fun, he's interested, he's competitive, he's friendly. He's just delightful. So I would say Stevie Strummer and Marvin, but I'm just reminiscing now back to the good old days, and reminiscing ain't what it used to be.
Oh, and I love that Stevie Strummer. Yeah, like you said, even though he's this kind of famous rock star, you know, he was humble enough to sit down with Marvin. And I feel like that's a lot of what kids need, is just an adult who can sit down and listen to them. I mean, I know I love to just sit and listen to my 4-year-old niece talk because her mind is just so interesting. You know, she's got all sorts of interesting imaginative ideas and funny things to say. And but you know, a lot of the times kids need to be heard when they're going through hard things. So
absolutely. You know,
yeah,
and I think especially now, at the time of COVID.
I was actually just going to ask you. Yeah.
Well, you know, I'm asked a lot of, you know, in fact, I just spoke to a TV reporter just this morning about that, about what's happening with children. And, you know, children today are going to look to the back in 20 and 40 years time, and they are going to think about, how did my parents cope with me during this time? This is a real time for parents to step up, because children are going to look at, how did they do it? They were awesome. They were amazing. Now, the whole thing was falling apart. No one knew what was going on, but my parents, they were like rock, you know, hopefully, in this kind of situations. But we all know that as we work towards being the strong, authoritative parents that we'd like to be, there are a lot of little challenges along the way. And, you know, the most important challenge right now is that of stress, without any doubt. You know, the murder rates in this country, in all cities, in all states, has rocketed, and we're not really quite sure why. I've just been doing some reading about, you know, the possible situations. Domestic abuse is higher than it's ever been, and a lot of the victims in being counted in that murder rate are as a consequence of that. So it is definitely a time to focus on emotional well-being. A lot of parents are very concerned, won't my child lose some math skills or lose some reading skills, or won't they fall behind here and there? And I get these questions every day, plenty of them. And I just want, the children will catch up. There's no question about it. Sometimes kids who go to accelerated schools makes the parents feel my child is such a genius and everything else like that. But eventually things even out, despite the luxury of a very good head start. And the same is true for academics. The kids will even out, but the emotional well-being might not, if we don't take into consideration the fact that they're feeling stressed and the fact that they're feeling anxious. Parents don't do a good job in identifying feelings in their children. They do a great job in identifying behaviors. They can say, my child didn't do this, and they hit, and they threw, and they bit, and they shouted, and they answered me back, and they interrupted, da-da-da-da. Well, does your child ever get stressed? Do they worry about stuff inside? Parent might have to think twice about that. And children and adults express their feelings much more easily than do children. Children frequently somaticize their anxieties. Children will have abdominal pain or headaches. Those are the most common ways in which anxiety presents in children, through somatic symptomatology. That's pretty interesting. They don't come out and say, I'm stressed out. But
you definitely see that with Harriet in her book.
That's Harriet. But if you stop and ask the questions and give the child an opportunity and look beneath that iceberg, what you cannot see, you're very likely to find that anxiety. So in terms of COVID, right now is the time to focus on Harriet's Monster Diary and give kids their necessary tools to address their anxiety. And Harriet learns a lot of them to help her overcome it. There are a lot of other things to do as well. No doubt having, maintaining structure in the child's life, sleep and eating activities and exercise and that. I don't want to focus on that. There's plenty to be said. But at this time of COVID, this is the time I think we should tell parents, focus on your child's emotional well-being. Focus on the strength of the family. Focus on your core values and let your child know, no matter what, we will not budge. We believe that in the end, it'll absolutely be fine. In the interim, we're going to face the brutal realities and do what we need to do to get by. But it's going to be good and it's going to be fine eventually, and we'll be able to live the lives we'd like to use. So that's just my my little commercial for COVID at this point, and for parents to help them feel, let them know that, yes, it's very important how they behave at this point. Parents need the tools, and the kids certainly do. So Karen, we're drawing to the end of it.
Yes.
Maybe you want to wrap up for us.
I was going to ask you if my last question for you was, so we have a very pithy, fun ST4 thing to help kids remember what to focus on. So what is there like a short little like sentence or phrase you would tell parents at this time to dealing with COVID and going back to school, or just in general dealing with emotions?
I think in general, I think that parents have to believe in themselves as well. And if there were words to give them, I would say, in the words of Dr. Benjamin Spock, who was the wonderful author for children's books, for parenting books back in 20 or 30 years ago, he would tell parents, trust yourselves, believe in yourselves. You know more than you think you do. You know more than you think you do. And I think we all essentially and eventually have everything that we need to know is already within ourselves. There are a lot of layers of the onion which have come to cover up and prevent us from self-actualizing as parents. We doubt ourselves, we aren't sure of ourselves. But going back to basics, treating ourselves really nicely, practicing meditation, taking our time every day to be grateful, waking up in the morning and for the first 20 seconds of opening your eyes, speaking about being grateful and what you do feel grateful, and being a model for your children about how you do express your gratitude in different ways, and be a model for your children as well as to how you handle stress and anxiety and worries in your own way, because you know these things. Parents know them. You know more than you think you do. So I would exhort parents to to get in touch with that. But sometimes it takes stepping back, going into your own space, going on that walk that Caroline spoke about when she gets the writer's block. And whether it's yoga, whether it's exercise, whether it's swimming, I love repetitive behaviors, repetitive activities, swimming, left-right orientation swimming, or dancing, or marching, or just walking, anything left, right, with rhythm. Rhythms enhance and equanimity and diminish stress. That's why so many children who get stressed will rock in their chairs or go outside and enjoy the swing, because that brings back rhythm. The first thing we lose when we get stressed will be our rhythms. We lose our pulse rates, go up, our gastrointestinal function changes, our bladder function changes. We have to bring that rhythmicity back through scheduling, through doing the same things, eating at the right time, because, dear parents, you know more than you think you do.
I love that. That's such great advice, because you've told me that many times when I'm like, if I'm doubting, am I qualified to help write these books? You always tell me, Caroline, you know more than you think you do. And so I think that's great. ST4 for everyone. And then trust yourself, and you know more than you think you do. I think that's also for everyone too, especially for parents. But yeah, I think that's all the questions I have for you, Ron. This has been a really lovely discussion. Was there anything else you wanted to say?
This is I wish I was in Montana right now and experiencing the weather right now. It's 109 in Phoenix today, and tomorrow is going to be 113. So,
oh my goodness,
something to think about.
Oh, I'm feeling very grateful for my mid 80s weather right now in Utah.
Enjoy it. I wish I was there too.
Wonderful. Well, thanks everyone for watching, and I think we're gonna have China come back on and give us a little outro.
Yeah. Well, thank you to Caroline Bliss Larson and Dr. Ron Melmed for sharing your work with us. And thank you to everyone for watching. Just as a reminder, you can purchase books by these authors and many others at Fact and Fiction website, factandfictionbooks.com. I also urge you to purchase Montana Book Festival merchandise at montanabookfestival.com. There you can also donate so that we can continue our programming after the festival with our Montana Book Festival Plus events. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, thank you guys for being here. It's been great.
Thank you.